It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the next CHME doctoral webinar. And this time, the subject which we will be learning more about is ethnography in tourism and hospitality research, looking at methods, at risk, and the discoveries. And we have two wonderful speakers, Dr. Isabella Ye and Dr. Wenjie Cai, both from the University of Greenwich. Both have used ethnography extensively, and they are here today to share some more information on that. So I believe, Wenjie, you will begin the discussion today. So please put your slides up for us. And for the participants in the room, you are very welcome to continue using the chat function here. I will keep an eye on this, and then we can use these as questions or prompts for the Q&A, which will be after Isabella's presentation. Over to you, Wenjie.
Just to check, Maria, can everyone see my slides?
Yes, indeed.
Right, I see nodding head. Excellent. Hi, everyone. Hope you are staying awake for the next half an hour. I just make sure I set my timers on so I don't run over time. Right. My name is Wenjie. I'm associate professor in tourism from Greenwich. I think I met some of you in different occasions, but good to meet some of you here if we haven't met before. So today I'm going to talk about ethnography. In my part of talk, I'm just going to give a more generic understanding of the concept as a methodology. And I think later on, Isabella will give a little bit more fun from her reflections as an ethnographer. So, but I will also give you some example. So today in my talk, I'm mostly going to talk about the origin, the evolution, and the definition of ethnography, and also talk about different technique. Some of you mentioned about that in the chat, that you like to learn more about observations. So I'm going to talk about that as well. And I'm going to give you two examples based on my research. One of them is from my PhD doing mobile ethnography. And then the other example I'm going to give is a auto ethnography example. And then I'm going to talk about some challenges and some 10 tips for you to take away. So let's start. So ethnography coming from have these roots in anthropology. So origin from 19th centuries. So the whole idea is to develop a thick descriptive account of the non-Western community and culture. And of course, today we can always criticize this concept and its origins very much a Eurocentric approach to look at understanding culture and community. But we also need to understanding where does this ethnography idea come from. And it becoming a central approach for anthropology. So a lot of time we talk about researching about anthropology, a lot of our thinking straight away using ethnography approach. And also the word understanding unfamiliar society, community, and culture. But it starts to develop into different disciplines. So ethnographic method has been influencing disciplines such as sociology, psychology, human geography, and culture studies, and really help them to understanding in these disciplines certain community, certain culture, certain type of movement. And of course, these days we have been using that extensively in tourism, hospitality, also in organizational studies as well. So I don't want to give a definite definition for ethnography, but some of the keywords to combining together to help understanding what is ethnography. So firstly, it's a qualitative research method. And also we can understanding based on the activities, what does ethnography do? So what you do normally is participating and observing participants' everyday life, or sometimes we call them informants' daily life, and conducting interviews that can be semi-structured, in-depth interview, but also can be conversational chat, work along with your participants or informants, and collecting a wide range of different type of data. And the goal for ethnography is to understanding the culture and the social dynamic of the group, and also the application and interpretation varies across different research contexts and disciplines. But very, very importantly is we need to understanding the role as a researcher. Here, when we're looking at ethnography, we are not detaching ourselves from the research context. Instead, we need to be immerse ourselves, fully throw ourselves into the field site. And the whole idea of ethnography is to emphasizing the importance of the hands-on and researcher as instrument, immerse-based approach. So there's a wide range of different type of ethnographies. And when you come across, have a chat with ethnographer from different field, don't assume your ethnography is the same as other people's ethnography. And you probably will be surprised that these days, a lot of ethnographers still using a quite detached way to conduct their field work. So only one end of more objective side, we understanding ethnography in a more realistic way. So in this case, the researcher objectively describe what is happening in that community, describing the culture. So it's taking a more detached perspective, more objective perspective. And I'm having a quotation mark of objective because in social science, it's never gonna be objective 100%, isn't it? So, but in this type of ethnography, sometimes I written in third person and focusing on more providing a accurate or unbiased, again, a question mark or a quotation mark of unbiased account. So for example, can be an objective and detailed account of how tourism influenced daily life of residents in Santorini. And then we have critical ethnography. If you are situated your research into critical theory paradigm, then ethnography can have a little bit of political edge. So it go beyond to describing the culture or the community, instead to challenge the power structure and inequality. So in this case, a researcher do have a certain agenda to advocate for change. So example here could be the impact of mass tourism on indigenous community in Amazon. So this approach highlights the power imbalances and advocate for the right and well-being of indigenous populations. And also, this autoethnography here is very, very personal. It's very subjective. It's a mix between autobiography and ethnography. So you putting these two elements of work together and become autoethnography. So the researcher here use self-reflection and personal experiences to connect with broader cultural context. So example could be a researcher exploring their own experiences as a member of LGBTQI plus communities to highlight broader social issues and culture dynamic. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute from one of the example here. So also there are different forms of ethnography. So I'm pretty sure a lot of you heard about ethnography. So you probably never don't really hear about the other words when ethnography start off. A lot of other researchers call them virtual ethnography. So basically, it's taking your field work online. So here it's all about studying the online community and cultures and evolves observing and participating in the digital interactions. And I have something to say about this later on in one of the tips. A lot of us thinking about if you do collecting some data online, collecting some data on, let's say, Booking.com, TripAdvisor comments, and that is ethnography. I have a big question mark there. And I'm going to ask you to think about if that is ethnography or not. I'm going to talk about that later. So some example could be analyzing the behavior and culture of user in the online gaming community. But here, the keyword here is still community there and the culture. The other forms of ethnography is mobile ethnography. Sometimes we call them multi-sited ethnography. There's some slight difference between them, but most days researchers use these two terms interchangeably. So rather than focusing on a single locations, this type of studies cultural phenomena across multiple sites. So you basically following a group of people, you following a story, you can follow an object, you can following, let's say, a piece of paper, a ticket, you can following did I say story earlier? Story, people, object. And yeah, so you've traveled with this particular item across different sites. Example here, travel with backpackers to understand the group dynamic of the community. And I'm going to share this example later on in the example. So common use techniques in ethnography, including participant observations, interviews, could be casual conversations, collecting artifacts and material, and reflexive notes. So basically, when you are entering the field, anything that come to your face, it could be data. And that is what making ethnography so exciting, because there's so much data to collect. And it's not very much in the setting that with interviewer, interviewee, and interviewee sometimes feel obligated to tell things that interviewer want to listen. But you are in a more natural setting that you could take on so many items potentially to be your data. And one of the beautiful things about ethnography is participant observation, because you literally can taking into all this rich detail of what is happening in their everyday context, everyday setting, into a rich, thick description. And also you can starting with a casual conversation with your informants. There's so many things could collect from the fields, such as tickets, brochures, such as all the material, potentially written materials, drawings. All this could be a very rich forms of data that making ethnography a beautiful method that other type of method could not compete. And most importantly, alongside of all the data you collect, you also take reflexive notes to reflecting your own feelings, your own encounters throughout the trip. Because remember, researcher here is an instrument, and you need to be understanding your positionality, your reflexivities throughout the trip, because they are also very important part of the data. So since participant observation is such an important item here, I'm going to spend a little bit of time to talk about observation. I'm pretty sure you guys understanding what is interview, but what is actually participant observation or observation? It's a particular technique that enables a researcher to systematically observe and record people's behavior, actions, and interactions. And here I want to highlight about systematically this term. Systematically observe and record. That means that you do have a specific focus of what you want to see. Just put yourself into a certain situation. If you want to observe your surroundings for 5 minutes, there's so many things you could write down, record, but you need to ask yourself this question: are they related to your research context or not? You don't want to collect a bunch of data that have nothing to do with your research focus, and later on you think, oh my God, although I collect so much data, but there's nothing to do with my research question. So think about that. So what you need to do is you systematically watching, listening, questioning, recording all your surroundings, people's behavior, the expressions, their spoken language, but also their their body language, what is not spoken as well. There's also quite important part, what is spoken, what's not spoken, and noticing the social setting as well. So why in what kind of situation they behave like that. So I always emphasizing that the ethnography, the beauty of ethnography, our beauty of the qualitative research is very much context specific. So what you need to do is you understanding the context, the locations around you, and help you to understanding in what kind of context this happened. So the context also deeply attached to the action, to the behavior, to the interactions. So you need to record the context as well. And what I would like to suggest is develop an observation plan. So that will give you certain kind of confidence when you go into the field, you have a clear understanding of what kind of data you would like to capture. So what to observe, how much detail you like to capture, right? I mentioned that earlier, actions, interactions, but also body language and the place and social setting. And then you understand, you decide what type of engagement you would like to have when you are in this kind of situation. So you like to be more actively involved with your participants? Do you want to take yourself as one of the informants, interacting with them, recording your interaction with them, or you want to be more detached with your research setting and just observe what is happening, but yourself are not actively engaged with them? You also need to consider you want to be more covered, or you want to let your participant know who you are researching or not, but you need to take all the ethical issues into consideration when you're doing the observation. I emphasize quite a lot, keep field notes and taking reflexive diary. I personally suggest these two are different things, but you can also merge them together. Field notes is mostly about what is happening, what you're collecting. So they are big chunk of them. They are main chunk of your participant observation data. Reflexive diary is mostly about reflecting on your own positionality, your own feelings. But a lot of time, these two elements, they are entangled and intersecting together as a reflection and a field notes type of data. So what type of research actually is suitable for ethnography if you want to kind of understanding a new type of culture, new type of community, never been explored before? This could be a quite a good approach. You feel, and also ethnography help to understanding a specific context and community and culture. I emphasize a lot because that is the root of ethnography, is to understand the community, understanding specific culture. But also it's quite powerful to conduct a longitudinal type of study. And if you want to understanding organization power dynamic and their culture, then this is also quite useful approach to do so. And then I'm going to move on to, okay, so I think half of the time is gone. So the rest of time, I'm going to talk about two examples. One is from my PhD. Not talk about PhD is happening. In my mind, I still feel like it's happening not long ago, but it's actually I finished my PhD in 2017, so it's nearly 10 years. So these are some of the publications from my PhD, and it's using mobile ethnography. So I follow a group of Chinese backpackers around Europe, and every time when I talk about this type of PhD, everyone was like, "Oh my God, that sounds the most fun PhD ever." And I agree. I love my PhD so much, and I still have spark when I talk about this. And but it's also hard work. And a lot of time when you are doing your PhD, following your participant around after a long day of travel, everyone sleeping, snoring, and I still need to type up my field notes. And I think that is the pain of doing a ethnography type of work, because it's very consuming, and you want to immerse yourself in with your participants and taking everything in, but also you want to write down everything happening at a time. And I mentioned this, so this is such an important part because our memory is gone by minutes. So if you don't really capture all the rich detail at that moment, a lot of time, those detail will be just gone. And you think about our memory is so powerful, but I want to question that again, because a lot of time when we are reflecting of things happening 3-4 days ago, a lot of time those reality are adjusted realities. But I want to talk about okay, it's muted. I want to talk about what is ethnography first, mobile ethnography. So mobile ethnography tend to follow, and I mentioned about earlier, an object or could be the idea as it travels through a network of global capital. So it could be a story, could be a cultural artifact, could be an idea, could be a group of people. And so in my type of research, I researching Chinese backpackers, a hypermobile group of people when they're traveling across across Europe, and I follow this following the people type of mobile ethnography for my trip. So this is my PhD fieldwork. What I do is I try to investigate Chinese backpackers' experience in Europe with a focus of their group dynamic, the technology use, and intercultural communication. So earlier I mentioned there's so many different type of technique. And when I researching Chinese backpackers, I do combining ethnography and multi-sited ethnography when I following them. So my following happening before the trip happened. So when I get in touch with them on a backpacker forum, that's already starting the data collection because some discussion already happened. We form a chat group and that is already generating data at the time. During the trip, I following them throughout the journey. I stay with them in the same hostel, in the same Airbnb, if you like. And we also have a chat group happening at the same time. So at the same time, ethnography and multi-sited ethnography is happening at the same time. And after the trip, I still continue the data collection when they are writing the blog, writing, sharing the travel memories on the chat group. All of them are part of the data. So you can see the beauty of ethnography is you can capture so much things, ranging from online activities to offline in-person interactions. So you can see a wide range of data has been captured. I also, during the trip, I did semi-structured interviews at the beginning of the trip until the end of the trip. I did participant observation throughout the trip and also reflexive journaling throughout, before, during, and after the trip. So I'm just giving you a quick idea of what is happening in that how I plan my observation plan. So I have a theoretical framework which kind of dividing by 3 layers: technological, social, and ideological layer. And based on this theoretical framework, help me to guide what kind of item I would like to observe, what kind of question I like to ask for interviews, and what kind of reflexivities items I want to focus on. So this kind of structure give you a better direction, if you like, when you are collecting your data, so you don't really get lost when you are in the field. And so this is my, I follow three group of backpackers. The first group, we travel from Barcelona all down to southern Spain and then to Portugal and go up and back to Madrid, where I lost my passport. No, sorry, I lost my UK ID, and then stay in Madrid for another 2 weeks when I get a replacement before I can fly back. And that is one of the health and safety issue you have to bear in mind when you do ethnography trip. And I'm going to talk about that later on. But it's actually a very, very fun trip. I still remember some of the memories when I staying with my participants, because this group are relatively young and we are similar age. We kind of become friends in the end, but it's also quite important that you need to negotiate your own identity as a fellow backpackers and as a researcher. And sometimes you have to switch between these 2 roles when you are collecting the data. And sometimes the boundary between these 2 roles are actually quite blurred. Another trip, the second trip across the UK, you can see literally we are touring around the British Isle. I haven't touched the Northern Ireland yet, but literally from the southern part of the UK to all the northeast part of Scotland. So this is with three relatively mature Chinese female backpacker, and it's such a uh, learning experience for me as well to I'll call them elder sisters for me traveling across the British Isles. I still following them on social media. I still see them traveling a lot these days after 8, 9 years. And yeah, so it's quite interesting dynamic for me to learn. And the third group is we're just traveling in Poland, relatively short trip. So you can see of these three trips, I purposely selecting three different type of locations in terms of the maturity of the destination, in terms of the offering, but also different group dynamic of the makeup of the group and also the length of the trip as well. So you can, although I'm not trying to generalize of the findings, I'm trying to expose the opportunity in the different length of trip, different type of dynamic, different type of culture setting to really see what kind of new things might come up from the experience. So the data we collected, including observation, including very informal conversational interviews, semi-structured interviews, other materials. For those who are not Chinese, WeChat moment is like kind of Facebook post, if you like, and a blog, and then online chat, and also reflexive diary. I would say the data is such a big chunk of data. When I analyzing them is such a headache. And these days we don't back then we don't really have AI or any transcriptions software to help us. So basically I have a gin and tonic when I transcribing the data. I'm not advising that. I'm sober for 1 year and 2 months. So I'm not advising that at all. But just to let you know, it's quite a painful experience going through, but also very, very exciting because when I re-listen to all the interviews and reread all my field notes, I do really feel like I relive the memory again. And it's a kind of, yeah, it's hard to explain. You only can understand that experience when you do ethnographies. If you collect rich data, every time you throw yourself into that data, you feel like you are in that moment again. So I want to mention about personal safety, and I'm have to say I'm blessed as a male researcher. I do have much less concern that I need to worry about. And I think Isabella maybe will talk about her perspective later from her presentation, but still have a lot of issues, especially in my trip. Because of low budget, because of student, I also have very limited budget when I for my field work. I have to for the moment where I'm not with my participants, I have to cut costs. That means I have to stay in couch surfer places. I have to stay in very cheap hostels. And when I lost my UK ID, I mean these days we use e-visa, so don't have that issue anymore. But when I lost my wallet, when I with my UK ID inside, I literally had to face the challenge that I might need to sleep on the street. And also I had so much interesting story that I had an argument with my couch surfer, and there will be another story because some of the story could be quite spicy. So I'll leave that later. I'm going to speak for another 5 minutes. All right, just check my time. And also ethical issue as well. I mentioned that earlier, how to how to see the boundary between yourself as a researcher and as a fellow backpacker. I just be cautious of time. So I'm going to skip that the discussion for the detail. To talk about the other type of ethnography I did after my PhD. Is a new journey I start is looking at getting people to turn off their smartphones when they go on holiday. So about digital free travel, or if you like, we call them digital detox holiday. So the background of this study is we try to conceptualize digital technology as a disciplinary power, and we try to conceptualize digital free travel as a way to resist towards the disciplinary power. So it's very much situated in the critical tourism studies, if you like. And then whole idea we choose to use ethnography here is to embed our study in the embodied turn. So embodied turn is called for paradigmatic shift from the tourist gaze, very much dominating the visual discourse towards multisensory gender bodies in tourism writing. So here we understanding digital free travel as a resist through a process of embodied practice with a focus on reflecting sensory feeling and negotiating doing within the power relations. So in order to capture that, we don't have other method to do it apart from noting out our own feelings to try to really understanding how our sensory feelings, how our own body is negotiating with these power relations. So that's why we're using autoethnography, and this also very much embedded of the theory we are situated in, which is we're using Foucault disciplinary power here. So according to Foucault, autoethnography is responding to the technology of the self. So very much engage in the problematizing our own subjectivities and self-transformation through producing a personal and reflexive account. So if our theory is advocating saying that, I think there's no other way to say no to autoethnography. Although a lot of reviewer might say, hey, wait a minute, how what's the word? How trustworthy it is, or how whatever the word is. So we conducted our autoethnography over 4 different type of trip over 4 years, and during which we wrote diaries of our thoughts, feelings, and emotions when we're traveling digitally free. So some of the advantage is we got a personal insight. We also have the space to talk about our research on voices. We are also providing relatable narrative that people who have that experience can resonate. We also provide thick, rich descriptions that sometimes by just doing conventional ethnography, you wouldn't be able to, and also providing a unique perspective. I know I've noticed I'm nearly running out of time. So 4 more minutes, and I'm just gonna a bit fast here. But we do a lot of criticism. We get a lot of criticism from reviewers. And I think if you're presenting this in other conferences, you also get quite a few critique. Firstly, it's about theoretical rigor. Some people might questioning that by just reflecting your own journeys, how rigorous it is. So they might think about this is lack of theoretical rigor, comparing with survey, comparing with interviews. And let's critique about self-usage on external validity. I can always fight back because we should stop using the same standard of quantitative study to judge qualitative study. And I have to say, even within the qualitative scholarship, there's a lot of scholars still using very much quantitative way to judge the quality of a study, and we need to revisit that. When I say that, I got very angry and agitated, as you can tell, and because we always get these kind of reviews. Anyway, if we have time, we can talk about that later. But I probably don't have time to talk about that. Right, I'm going to quickly talk about some common mistakes in ethnography. Firstly, I want to talk about some people think about participant observation is ethnography, and the question here, the answer here is not. Okay, observation is a technique. You can use participant observation as a method, standalone method. That's perfectly fine. But you can only claim that as ethnography only if you try to understand a community, a cultural phenomenon, and you immerse yourself into a community for a relatively long period of time. So you try to separate these two together. Although participant observation is a star research, put them together interchangeably. And then the second common mistake is online content analysis is ethnography. As I mentioned that earlier, if you're collecting a big chunk of online data and analyze it, I would say, well, just call them online content analysis. There's nothing wrong with that. Only if you are spending a big extensive period of time online, try to understand the online community, online culture, then you can claim that as ethnography. And then a lot of people, when they're writing a journal article, they use the ethnography. They put the imitation as, oh, it's subjective, it's biased, lacking scientific rigor. But again, I have a question mark here. Are you using quantitative mindset to judge your qualitative study or not? Right, qualitative study is supposed to be subjective anyway, right? Okay, quickly run through 10 tips. Right, tip 1, make sure you immerse yourself fully in the ethnography field. So spend enough time in the field, try to understanding the context, the culture you're studying, and then building the relationship with the community is very, very important to start with. Be reflexive throughout the trip. Try to understand your own background, your bias, and how does that influencing the dynamic, how you observe, how you see things. Keep a reflexive journal to note down your thoughts and experiences. Number 3, maintain the ethical standards. Make sure that have the ethical consideration of everything you do. Make sure your participant or informants have the information before they agree to do things because you are actually following them for rather long period of time. And then develop a group observation skills. It is important. So pay attention to details. Be quite observant to some non-verbal cues. Like I mentioned earlier, what has been spoken, what hasn't been spoken, what is the kind of subtle agreement, what is the agreement behind the table, right? Capture all those details are very important, and sometimes they are the most important part of the data, because those type of data is something you cannot capture from your interview or from the other type of data collection. Number 5, be patient, be flexible, be open-minded. When you're in the field, a lot of times it doesn't really go as planned, so you have to be flexible when you are in the field. So if this way doesn't go through, try to see if you can go the other way to meet your goal, to meet your goals. And ethnography, the beauty of it is you can use multiple methods, including interviews, observations, collecting documents, taking photographs, but make sure they are all done in an ethical way. You need to spend a genuine period of time to build the rapport, especially at the beginning when you are with your participant. Be respectful, be empathetic, and approachable throughout the trip, because by establishing that relationship really help you to collecting data. So spend a good period of time in the beginning to establish that. Engage in active listening. Pay attention to participants say and how they say it, especially how they say it as well, and encourage them to share their own story from their own word. And analyze the data continuously. Don't leave that in the last minute. Collecting data, analyzing the data if you can, when you have a moment. And also, when you're writing up your findings, try to be as clear as possible to tease out the rich data, because that is the beauty of ethnography. Oh my God. Okay, I'm 2 minutes. Thank you. Whew, sorry, I feel a bit stressed. Right.
Very much, Wenjie. This was brilliant. And there will be time after Isabella's presentation for questions. So if you've got some questions in mind, please write them down or make use of the chat and write them in there. But there will be time in a minute. So many thanks to Wenjie. You can take a breath of, well, I guess, air, breathe deeper. And Isabella, over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'm just waiting for a moment for the PowerPoint to load.
Yes, it's
do give me a
loading.
thumb up if you can see it. Is it coming up?
I can.
Perfect. Okay. Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Wenjie. That was a really thorough overview of ethnography as well as your own experience of doing that. I couldn't done any better than you within that 30 minutes. What I'm about to take you through is quite different from what Wenjie was saying. A lot of those of you who are planning to use ethnography or have done it before, you probably already studied what ethnography is, different techniques from a textbook. And what I will be talking about is something that you might not necessarily learn from textbook. It's essentially what it feels like from the inside, and more specifically, the type of risks, the mess, and sometimes even the ethnography body, and how, as ethnographers, our experiences, our emotions, our memories alone can be a legitimate knowledge and publishable materials. So a very brief introduction about myself. My name is Isabella. I am also working in the University of Greenwich as a senior lecturer in tourism and events. However, when I did my PhD, in a very different location than Wenjie, not in Europe, but in Australia. So the picture here you see on the slides is the place where I did my PhD. Very different, very unique. I did my PhD in University of Queensland, and this place is in Central Australia, a place called Uluru Kata National Park. Very much isolated. Now, before I dive into sharing my experiences, I'd like to just start by a question to all the audiences. You've listened to what Wenjie was saying, you have some experiences, maybe some aspirations of doing ethnography. And first question I'd like everyone to perhaps pop something in the chat is, in ethnography, what counts as data? It can be a word, a few phrases, very quick. Just pop something in the chat for me. Okay, perfect. I think we have a couple popping up. Yourself as ethnographer, absolutely. Interactions, encounters with the field, with the people, whether or not it's tourists that you're looking into, whether or not the guests staying in a resort or potentially hotel managers, depending on what research you're doing. Data could be everything around us. It could be coming from our observational notes, our gestures, brilliant, the nonverbals, the reactions, the people, behaviors, interaction, expression. I think pictures, brilliant, field notes, interviews, conversations, good, both the spoken and the non-spoken, and everything else that help you find the answers. That's a really philosophical stance. I agree. So I think what we often think about data, or what we have been trained, or what most of the textbooks teach us, is data coming from the interviews, right? The conversations you have with the people, with the communities, the observations, your field notes about your participants, the field notes about the place. It can be information that you extracted from the research site, or very often we say it is the neutral outcome of a rigorous research design process, your findings, your manuscript. But what I want to argue today is very often those moments that get left out, and some of you have already put it in the chat, is that the ethnographer self, your own emotions, not just the emotions about your participant, your own emotions, your feeling of fear, your feeling of loneliness, your feeling of exhaustion, the empty moments when you are doing absolutely nothing in the field. Or sometimes even it can be changed, that the research field, the ethnography experience change you, who's doing the research, and the partial embodied and positioned researcher. Now, this is not about self-indulgence, really. This is data. I'm sure many of you have kept a field diary when you are conducting your ethnography. and then at certain point you feel like, what you're writing is really too personal, too messy, or maybe something happened to you, you feel really embarrassed or awkward to even appear in a paper. Now, this is something perhaps I want to preempt and want you to take away from this session, is that your experience, your memories, your feelings as ethnography in the field is not just incidental to the knowledge, to the findings chapter produced. It is in fact part of it. What you felt, what your body did, what you were afraid of, and also how the field changed you. These are a crucial part of the knowledge creation process and also the knowledge. I know it can be quite hard argument to accept, so I'm going to show you what it looks like when you treat yourself and your own ethnography experiences as legitimate research site instead. Now, another very quick question to ask you. I know some of you have done ethnography already, so just drop your answers in the chat, one word or one short phrase, whatever comes first. You are about to go in the field alone for the very first time as PhD student or an ECR. What are you most afraid of? For those of you who have already done your field work, what surprised you? What challenges that you faced during your ethnography field work? I see people are typing and I'm trying very hard not to ruin the silence. The most challenging part is building a rapport, especially with strangers, to get acceptance into the community. Yes, absolutely. The feeling of the outsider, the challenge is to create trust. Yep. They're not being able to gain the trust. So I think that rapport building is coming off very strongly. Not sure what exactly counts as data. My patients sometimes surprise me the most. Good. Most challenging is connecting with the participant, afraid of being rejected. So it's all about the fear. You can still continue typing them in the chat as I go along. But let me tell you a little bit about what I did, the journey that me and my co-author went. So as earlier shown, I did my PhD field work in Central Australia. It's a place called Uluru. It's absolutely rugged, it's very remote. And my collaborator, her name is Anita. She did her ethnography in very similar locations. One location in Tasmania, so Freycinet, also commonly known as One Glass Bay, as well as East Kimberley, Kununurra in Western Australia. So to put them on the map, for those of you who are not familiar with the geography on the other side of the world, they are essentially all located outside of the southeast coastal area where the majority of the urban area or the cities are. More so than ever, my location was based in a desert. So what these three sites share in common is they are extremely remote. You cannot get there without a car. It's absolutely massive. So just driving from the attraction to our hotels takes at least 30 minutes, and that is at a speed of 50 miles driving on the highway. It's really isolated. It's away from very basic infrastructure, things like toilet, things like water fountains. You have to essentially carry a massive 2-liter water bottle every day yourself. And it has the location has really poor connectivity, both in the sense of telephone. So my phone literally have no reception most of the time. And also there's zero public transport. So both of us have to rely on not driving a small car, but a big giant 4-wheel drive to get around. There's very sparse population, so you barely see many people in the locations. If you are in a case of emergency, you have no one to call for help. This place is particular, I think, for my location, has quite extreme climate. So when I did my field work, I went there 3 times. Some of the period I was experiencing 40-degree heat, and you literally cannot go outside after 8 a.m. in the morning. And some of the month I went for my second trip, it was -2 degrees at night. And there are a lot of wildlife, both on the road, as well as in the waters, such as crocodile. These are the kind, if you're not familiar with the wildlife in Australia, they can kill you literally in an instant. I did my PhD fieldwork in 2018. Anita did hers around 2019 to 2020, just as COVID began. We were both going in as a solo PhD student, very naive, don't know what's going on, what's going to happen. We are both female. We are potentially at the time not as lucky as many of you, because no one in my school actually done ethnography, let alone going this far into the outback. Many of my PhD candidates, my fellow PhDs, were saying, why don't you just end up doing some interviews and focus groups in the city? Why go so far in? And for both of us, it's the first time ever in the field, and also carrying the burden of gathering data, right? So that's literally your one chance, gathering the data, write your PhD and done. And also for us, it's the first time ever that we travel alone. So this is part of our PhD. So we did our field work in remote Australia for separate, different doctoral projects at different times in different places with different universities and supervisors. Our ethnographer for the PhD was pretty orthodox, studying tourism and hospitality phenomenon. We're collecting data, the things that Wenjie has covered, photos, interviews, observations, and our embodied memories. Now, at that point, neither of us even considered studying ourselves as ethnographers. Then, a year later, we met at a conference and we started talking quite informally about our own experiences in the field. That includes our feeling of loneliness when we are in the field, isolation, fear very often, and a number of different types of events that made us really question our sanity and worth, why we are doing this. There's also constant reaching our physical limits, that you just literally couldn't do it anymore. There's despair, there's also regrets. Why did we do this? While at the same time, we also feel that sense of freedom of doing research in the remote spaces, feeling quite powerful, less restrained, and we're also forming this genuine friendship with complete strangers and coming out of the whole thing quite transformed. And then we quickly realized, what did this actually do to us? So this is where we decided to study ourselves and our experiences as lone, female, and also amateur ethnographers. And this is where we started this reflexive term, where we start going back down our memory lane, looking at our phone, all the photos that we have taken during our original PhD fieldwork, and we use them as a prompt to write our memories together with our field diaries, where we're writing about how much I miss home, how much she missed her 3-year-old son at the time. We really took a deep immersion into our own memories and our own experiences at the time. We then exchanged those memories. We spent 21 hours in recorded Zoom conversations. We read each other's accounts out loud. We question each other's interpretations, and then we go back and patch and rewrite our memories to try to make sense of it together. And this continued and repeated reflexivity enabled us to notice things that we previously neglected and even bottled up. How the field and even the environment that shape ourselves and affect how the knowledge is created. And we become aware of the more than human that is going beyond just ourselves, as well as the people that we're interacting. So what you are looking here is an ethnography into ethnography. It's a study of a study. So 2 of us conducted a dual auto-ethnography, so the 2 of us, into our own previous fieldwork experiences as ethnographers. And we use a method called collaborative and retrospective visual memory work, because the data collection of our own experiences happened after, post the actual field work. So essentially, we are making the process of knowing into an object of study. Now, some of you might wonder, what the hell are you talking about? So fast forward to the outcome, we ended up publishing this into basically looking at slightly different conceptual lenses, looking at the same set of data. So the first paper we published back in 2023 is what essentially we found when we looked at our own experiences in the field through this conceptual lens of gender, through this conceptual lens of liminality, as well as deep reflexivity, essentially trying to legitimize that solo female researcher field experiences as publishable knowledge. And the second paper came out a bit later, just last year, where we took a slightly different turn, looking at the post-humanist entanglement with the field using confession as well as diffractive analysis that reposition ethnography from just a form of data collection methodology to knowledge reciprocity. So because of the time I have, I'm just going to show you a few core threads in terms of what the two papers were essentially talking about. And that goes back to, I think, something that Wenjie briefly talked about, as well as what I was asking many of you to think about, is what is the realities of ethnography that sometimes you experienced, but you forget to talk about. And this is something that ethical clearance really consider. Your methodology textbook often leave this out and don't prepare you for, is the risks in the field. Many of you talking about the trust, building rapport, but do you know there are also danger that could happen? Depending on where you do your field, I'm mainly speaking from my own experiences, common crimes that targeting tourists, that targeting hotels, that targeting guests can also target you. Things like robbery, assault, harassment, violence, illness, you may fall sick during your field work, and accidents. I had a car accident on the first day arriving in my field. I was nearly assaulted, touch wood, thank God, by two male strangers when I was approaching them, trying to recruit them as my participants. These are the physical dangers. You also experience bodily discomfort from the environment, the exhaustion from hours and hours of talking. I'm sure Wenjie can relate. You're following people, you feel so exhausted, and you need to also make sure that you need to record all the data, you need to write your field note, you need to pay attention to what people are saying and not saying. For me and Anita, we also have the heat, the exposure to health hazard, and very often limited access to healthcare. There's also psychological strain coming from your field work. You are lonely, you are there by yourself, especially if you are doing field work away from home, feeling anxious, you don't know whether or not you're collecting is meaningful data, as Neha was just saying. Exposure to stress, sometimes even trauma, in cases where you might be doing a topic that is of sensitive nature or political nature, and sometimes the extreme isolation. There's often ethical dilemma and gender-related risks as well. So for example, confidentiality. Sometimes you're going too naive. And these risks don't just stay in the field while you were there. What happens to you in the field, the fear, the anxiety, or the guilt, the good things and the bad, it travels back with us. And a lot of the emotions I was talking about actually still active in my mind whenever I'm thinking about the accident, whenever I'm thinking about the near assault, my hand still shakes, right? So they are still there with you when you sit down to write. It manifested in our body. When you talk about it years later, it doesn't really just become past tense because the field work is over, it becomes part of you. So the point I was trying to make here is field work is really embodied labor. It's both in the past tense as well as in the present tense. And the body is very much the instrument through which the research is conducted. It is epistemologically significant. What you feel, what you experience in the field, shape what you notice, shape what you listen, shape what you can access and what you come to understand and interpret as part of your findings. And another thing quite interesting and fascinating for us is how many different masks we wear when we go into the field. Because when we go into the field, we think ourselves as an ethnographer, we think ourselves as an academic, as a researcher. We do not just go in as that one role. We go in as a researcher, absolutely. Most of us doing research in leisure setting. So whether or not you're doing tourism or hospitality or event studies, you're going as a tourist as well. You're going as a student in training. You are going as a woman, a man, a queer person. You're going as a mother. You're going as a daughter. You're going as a stranger in an unfamiliar place, an unfamiliar community who absolutely don't know who you are. And that's why many of you are talking about trust, building that rapport. And the field doesn't really just recognize you as that one role. It activates all of these different roles simultaneously, and sometimes at the worst possible moments. When we were doing our field work, what Anita and I noticed is that we were trapped in this constant state of switching different roles between the academic who needs to recruit participants, who needs to observe, listen, record what happens in the field, and also the person who were absolutely exhausted every day after walking 20 kilometers a day and homesick. Well, Anita is a mother who had left a 3-year-old son at home and she was missing him sick. And also the tourist like me, who was secretly, sometimes I enjoy the landscape where even though I was supposed to be working there. So that guilt is, I can't waste the time in the field because I'm technically here working, collecting data, but God, it's so pretty out here. I want to take photos. So in our work, we describe this as this tension and negotiation of different identities. But what it really felt like is this fragmentation. We feel fragmented. We are uncertain about which version of ourselves I was supposed to be performing, right? Now, we looked at risks, we look at the body, the guilt, and the impossible question of which identity we exhibit. And I imagine some of you might be wondering, if all of this is so difficult, why bother? Why don't we just use a different method that doesn't require you to be alone in the outback or in a stranger community to build rapport, and then sometimes alone at 2 a.m. for me in the morning, wondering whether or not I am a researcher or a tourist or just a person who made a really questionable career choice. Now, here's what matters. All of this mess I'm talking about is the method. The mess was happening in the field, but understanding of the mess as a method that comes later in the conversation, me and Anita, when we sit down a few years later to look at our photos, try to make sense of what the field work has done to us, we discover that in many of our conversations, our emotions, our memories, while doing ethnography has the same epistemological value and legitimacy in advancing tourism and hospitality knowledge, because us, as ethnography, through us, knowledge is created. It's expanded and it's disseminated, right? But our realities, our feelings and the vulnerabilities in the field were often seen as a weakness. And your supervisor might tell you to shun away from it, to write in a manuscript. The method we used also through this process is in fact quite well established. They are recognized qualitative method, Wenjie was just talking about, has their own established genealogy. So for example, dual ethnography, which is double autoethnography, as well as collaborative visual memory. They have established, they are of really rich rigor in terms of epistemological value, as well as process in terms of how to do it. Another thing I want to talk about is tourism and hospitality related field work, as well as in other disciplines, has a really unique liminal experiences for researchers like you and me. So we are quite similar to tourists. When we enter the field, we are essentially removed from this really rigid academic structure from a university. You're working in a touristy or resort places or a community, building rapport with complete strangers. You are immersing your working self among the tourists or hotel guests or communities. You might be empathetic to your participants on a sensitive topic, or sometimes you are managing delicate relations and access. And this is essentially the middle place that you are inhabiting is what makes your field work really generative, not just for data collection purposes, but also a site of personal transformation. And a lot of this reflection, this introspection, this memory, this diary, this journaling, coming from this empty moment when you have no social life when you are in the field, these empty moments, the feeling of boredom, the feeling of just waiting to recruit people, right? Very often what I found myself is waiting for participants who never arrived and spend hours just sitting on a rock doing nothing. Or driving alone for hours in silence. Very often in the remote Australia, we lose track of time and space. You forget what time is it. That really confront that loaded thoughts and emotions by yourself. So being honest about that in your writing is in fact a methodological contribution, not just weakness. Just conscious of time. Now, as we continue with our conversations through our memories, recordings, photographs, we thought we know what we are doing until one of us realized how frequent we talk about the noises in our recording. So things, for example, for us is the wind, the rain, the waterfall, sometimes the birds, chirping birds in the background. And then we started noticing similar things in our memories as well, sitting on the really hot, scorching rock that made it almost impossible to sit still, or sometimes it's the cup of really beautifully made barista coffee that gives us comfort, or sometimes even the crocodile that my co-author Anita has been dreaded the entire time ended up to be her sustenance on her final night in the fieldwork, where she eat a crocodile burger as she leaves the field. So all of these little trivial things sounds very obvious, but they weren't, because our training very often equipped us with a very particular kind of attention that is very geared towards human experiences, human participants, human sense making. But what we often missing is the more than human, the environment that has always been in the background of all of this field work. The landscape, the weather, the infrastructure, the animals, the objects. We often write them as a context, a setting, sometimes a barrier, rather than a legitimate participant in their own rights. So this is where we had a bit of an epiphany and realization of this anthropocentric default or human-centric default in knowledge making, is this assumption that humans are the only legitimate focus of research and knowledge, and everything else is the setting. And this is kind of where the continued reflexivity for us revealed is that reorientation that more than human has been doing all of these things along, and we're just being trained not to see them, not to notice them. So a couple of things that we did in the second paper that we wrote about the more than human, as well as using Anna Ching's art of noticing, which is a deliberate practiced attentiveness to what has been in the background in the field. So we become very much aware in our own memory, in our pictures, that human experiences was happening alongside a much bigger assembly of presences, for example, the landscape, matter, weather, creature, for example, the donkey and the photo, indigenous knowledge systems, all of them were in fact active and affecting us. But the problem here is none of them have any place in the epistemological and methodological frameworks that we have learned through our training. Now, just conscious of time, I'll try to wrap it up in the next few minutes so that we have some time for question and answer. So I want to kind of bring that all together. What does that mean? Both from Wenjie's talk and also my talk. Is the first thing is moving from data collection to knowledge reciprocity. So the field, when you go into the ethnography, whether or not it's a community, it's urban space, it's a remote area, it's a hotel, it gives something to your research. And remember, the field, wherever that might be, is not just a mine where you go in and mine and extract data. Knowledge and the learning and the findings are produced in the encounter between yourself, the people, the places, and also objects that made up of that field.